Hi, that's my small production using the fluid simulation in Blender, and I'm going to follow that little production up with a bit of a fluids tutorial. And well, I know my video isn't perfect and it's a fairly noobish, and my tutorial is going to be a little bit of a noob tutorial, just like my previous video tutorials for this software. And I'm going to offer that what I can from my learning point of view, because I find a little bit of lack of information for this software, and I've learned a few things, and there's not a lot of harm in putting out a little tutorial for that. I'm not going to try to build that whole scene in a tutorial in the video for YouTube, because simply put, it would be too many videos, far too time consuming, and too much work. So what I'm going to do is generate a more basic scene and go over some of the settings, materials, and lightings that I used, and then I'll enter my blend file from that video and go over some of the things in that. I start off with the default scene here, and I'm going to move my camera and my light to a different layer to get them out of the way. I'm going to work from this cube and make it into my fluid object. I'll do that by resizing it to 4 times its original size, Z key into wireframe. Then I'm going to add another cube. This cube I'm going to make my domain object, so I'm going to size that, this time to 30 times the original size. So now I have a large cube surrounding a small cube. As the last step, I'm going to create a floor for my water to splash onto. So I'm going to place my cursor, snap it to the grid, add another cube, resize that cube, this time limiting Z, because as a floor I don't want it to grow in height, I'd rather maintain its present thickness. And I'll size it to 30 times to match the domain. Now my floor reaches to the walls of the domain. And from here I'm ready to start initiating some of the fluid objects. So I'll start with my big cube, come down and enter the Object tab, and then enter the Physics tab. In it we have 4 tabs, which is Fields, Collision, Cloth, Soft Body, Fluid. So I'll activate that for Fluid and make it my domain object. The bulk of the settings for a fluid simulation are found in the domain objects dialog. So we'll be returning to that and doing a lot of talking about that particular item. Next one I'll activate is the smaller cube, which I'll activate as a fluid and make it the fluid object. And then the floor. Again, the floor has to be activated as a participant in the fluid simulation, and this time I'm going to make it an obstacle. And I'll simply leave these settings as default because those will work. So, well, the only thing left to do now is to do a little bit of setup on the domain settings, and I'm going to go through those a step at a time and see how far I can get in this video for setting that up. The first most important part of setting up the domain object is first choosing a path. When I bake this, by default, Blender will be set up to generate 250 frames of JPEGs for its own video. And when I bake it, for each one of those 250 frames, the bake will generate 2 files in regards to the fluid information, and by default those are set to go to a temporary folder on C. Well, I already know that temporary folder is a mess, and I don't want to make it more of a mess, so I've made a directory on my desktop to keep these files organized in. So I'll navigate there and select that directory. The second thing I'm going to want to do here is change the setting called display-quality. By default, it's set to preview and final. And I want to change preview to final. And what that does is when I bake my simulation, instead of getting a preview resolution to see during the bake and as I'm working with my experiments on the fluid and trying to get it to do the things that I want it to do, instead of seeing the resolution of 25, I'll see the resolution of 50. So I'm going to start this bake and we'll see what we get with the present settings. The bake will go very quickly and we won't actually see much happening. These settings are not very good for a fluid simulation. So that's it. It's baked already. This is the present resolution, and already looking at my simulation, it has some problems, and these problems are going to need to be dealt with. First thing I'm going to want to do is look at actually what happened there, and to do that I'm going to change the display quality setting again. I'm going to change it to geometry. What that does is changes my fluid back into the domain, and that way I can demonstrate that when the domain disappears, it actually becomes the fluid mesh, and the fluid object becomes somewhat irrelevant. About the only thing that it does is determines the size of the fluid in a relative way, and that'll probably need a little bit of elaborating what I mean by that. So I'm going to change that back to final, keyframe so that it turns back into the fluid, and have a look at that. As you saw, the domain disappeared and became the fluid mesh. At this point, we can safely move the cube, which defines the size, relative size of the fluid, and we can take that and move that to a different layer. So I'm going to put it over here and get it out of sight. Now I'm going to cut out of the video and check on my time, because time always runs short on these videos, so I don't want to run out here. And I'll be back in just a second. As I suspected, I'm pretty much out of time, so I'm just going to close up this video tutorial and carry on in the next video, and we'll see how far we can get in that one. So I'll see you in that video, and happy modeling till then.